Welcome back to the Cow Park Bros podcast. Jason and I were just discussing really the fallout from the President Biden vaccine mandate for federal workers and also companies with 100 employees or more. And the second segment, we're going to be talking about good old Texas, a place where the barbecue is amazing, but the laws are ever so oppressive. God, do they find more creative ways to fuck people over. I'm going to quote a article from NPR. Apparently, now you can carry a handgun in Texas without a license, training, or a background check. Gun rights advocated lauded the new state law called constitutional carry by supporters for removing what they considered an unfair burden on gun owners. The law, which took effect Wednesday, has its critics. Gun safety groups oppose permitless carry. And many law enforcement officials, including Dallas Police Chief Eddie Garcia and Doug Griffith, the president of the Houston Police Officers Union, have said it would make the jobs of police officers more dangerous. Still, the state's Republican majority legislature passed a law earlier this year, and Republican Governor Greg Abbott signed it over the summer. Politicians from the federal level to the local level have threatened to take guns from law-abiding citizens, but we will not let that happen in Texas, Abbott said in a June statement when he signed the permitless carry bill and 6 other gun laws. Well, he was just having a good old day. Texas will always be the leader in defending the Second Amendment, which is why we built a barrier around gun rights this session, he added. They're literally talking about a fucking wall when they're talking about gun laws. Jason, what the hell, man?
I always love when you end your open with the whole "what the hell" thing. It's like, is that a question statement?
Oh yeah, it's a question. It's a statement. In the context of this segment, it's a segue. What are your thoughts on that?
So one thing, when I was looking into this, one thing I found pretty funny. I found an article in the Texas Tribune. They mentioned that as of September the 1st, that just passed recently, Texas created 666 new laws. So I found it funny that it was that exact number, 666, because we know what else that number represents. So is that coincidence? Think about that for a second, folks. But speaking of some of the other new laws, we'll get to the one we just talked about, as well as another huge one that affected, or I should say, enraged a lot of people in this country. But some of the other stuff I found interesting. They expanded the medical marijuana use in Texas. Social studies curriculum changes. It limits teachers from discussing current events and systemic racism in classes. So it can't do that in Texas. No critical race theory bingo, as you say.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
Professional sports teams within the state, getting state funding, are required to play the national anthem before games. Excuse me. There was another good one in here. Actually, this one actually is good. Police have to have their body cameras on at all times. Unnecessary chokeholds by the police are no longer allowed. Unnecessary, which seems pretty subjective to me. Let's see. New law doesn't allow cities within the state to basically defund the police, essentially. There was a good one here. Criminalizing homeless camping. Makes camping in unapproved public places a misdemeanor crime that carries a fine of up to $500. So please explain to me, if these people are homeless, where are they going to get $500? So yeah, just some of the weird stuff Texas created here in the last, that's been effective since the 1st of this month. But the permitless carry. I'm just going to remind folks something we talked about a few episodes ago when it comes to, in Chicago, police officer Ella French, who was murdered by an individual who was a felon and shouldn't have had a gun, but only got it because somebody bought the gun for him. But again, unlicensed, with the background check, clearly wasn't going to get a gun. Probably not very trained clearly for it. So just kind of want to put that out there for people. But here in the state of Texas, they basically made that allowed, where any handgun, you don't need training, license, or background check. So basically anybody who's 21 or over, you can carry a gun openly in Texas. When I saw that, the first thing I admittedly, when I first saw that, I just looked. I thought it was a moment of shock, but then I realized, oh, it's just Texas being Texas. I mean, does this really surprise anybody that Texas did this? Didn't surprise me per se, but it's like, really, this is where we're going in this time of 2021 to let anybody carry around a gun in the entire state? I'll bet Dallas and Houston are going to be really interesting to roll around now. So just roll around town. Just you can actually have your gun hanging outside your car window. So yeah, that's really. Again, I don't know much more to say other than it's Texas being Texas.
I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen footage, but it's to me it's much ado about nothing. I'm not trying to make too much light of it, but they already you can pretty much just have a rifle and shit just walking around. So it is a different place.
What I found interesting too is that there's a company called Salesforce. Have you heard of that company, Terrence?
Well, yes, I have.
So yeah, I'm sure many businesses like the one you work for and mine both use that place. They're actually headquartered, I believe, here in Indy. But I found an article, well, several, that basically indicated that Salesforce is offering to help relocate employees in Texas due to specifically their new law that we're going to talk about here in a minute. So when I saw that, it made me kind of think about here in the last few years, there's been a mass exodus of people leaving Illinois for different reasons related to what we're going to talk about in this segment. But it made me think. I'm very curious to see what kind of numbers Texas might start having if there is one. Granted, the climate in Texas, when it comes to other stuff, might make it better to be in Texas. No, I know it's no state tax, better business growth down there, so maybe people might stay because of that. But this new gun thing is probably going to scare some people away because they don't want to deal with that, you know. And then one of the other big things they changed recently was what I mentioned. People were enraged about, and I get it. Is that they made a change to their abortion law down there? Terrence, did you see this?
I did see that. Yes.
What were your thoughts? Well, folks, the big thing with that, for Terrence, I get Terrence's opinion. The big thing is what they essentially have done is they made it illegal in Texas to get an abortion if it's been 6 weeks of pregnancy. In addition to that, the right to sue is in the hands of private citizens. So basically, if I'm a citizen of Texas and I know of someone providing an actual abortion, I can file a lawsuit against that individual and I can receive a minimum of $10,000 plus attorney fees. And let's say if I'm somebody that gave a ride to the abortion clinic for someone, that private citizen can sue me for that same amount because I gave somebody a ride. That's what Texas is doing right now. That. So just with that information there, and of course, I'm sure you have others that you looked up. Again, people were upset about that one, and rightfully so. Most of what I saw was women, and I can't say I don't understand that because I get it completely. But what were your thoughts about that?
When I first saw it, I thought, oh, so they are literally trying to incentivize Karenism.
I didn't think about it that way. They're
incentivizing Karenism. Some random ass schmuck all up in your business and shit. First of all, Texas, everything about Texas screams, we want them to grow up so that we can kill them. As a famous comedian once said. So, yeah, man, this shit is ridiculous. I think anything that basically goes against a woman's right to choose in that scenario is, obviously out of pocket. And with Greg Abbott being in charge of that state, it's not all that surprising. And speaking of elections having consequences, as luck would have it, the Supreme Court, who was put in by the previous president, good chunk of it, by the way, opted not to even take a look at that case. When I say the Supreme Court, I'm referring to the highest in the land, not the state Supreme Court. So,
right.
So yeah, I feel that's an important distinction. But yeah, they said nah, fam, we're good. We're not even going to look at that, which means it's the law of the land of Texas for now, and just be on the lookout for people being bigger assholes because of it. I don't know if anyone's gonna necessarily stay away from a state because look, if violence in Chicago and high taxes didn't scare and didn't chase me off in my 20s from Illinois because the pizza's superb, I kind of feel like it's the same thing with Texas. You know, not to mention a lot of folks don't just have the ability to just take all their shit and move every time a law is changed. Sometimes places are so fucking oppressive. It's kind of like that deal where it's like, well, if you don't like it, you can leave. Well, there's an asshole like you somewhere else. You're not fighting the oppression, in your local municipality. You're fighting oppression everywhere. You know, the story in Texas, honestly, probably is somewhere else, like Florida. Hell,
Well,
your state may have some very nuanced fuckery on the books as well.
well, it's true. It's funny you mentioned that because I believe in a different article I saw on it was the Texas Tribune. They mentioned that there were other states that are looking to follow Texas's lead when it comes to the gun thing and the abortion thing. And you mentioned Florida; they were one of them, as well as Georgia, which compared to some other issues that have gone on in this country recently, those three states are pretty well linked together with a lot of it. So that really makes sense. Now, I agree with you that most people don't have the ability to just up and leave, and I agree. Uh, but they might not leave right now immediately, but they may soon look to leave in the next years or so, in the next coming years. And I agree with you. There's, like you said, a hole in every state, but some people may look to move to a more liberal state if that's more important. If that's important to you, things like that. Or at least now they know I'm not going to Texas because of this. Now, me personally, obviously, I'm not going to personally get an abortion for obvious reasons. If I have to explain that to anybody, then the show's probably above your, above your head. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I know if I know specifically, not that I didn't know before, but if anybody was unaware of how Texas is, now they know. And this is probably could be a reason why people choose not to go to Texas. People have always asked me, "Hey, so if you ever move out to a different state, what state would you go to?" I want to go. I would love to live in Texas. The hot weather, blah 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 blah, and all the other benefits to it. But I'm like, well, great, but do I really want to be in the Texas mentality, the Texas lifestyle when it comes to all this stuff like this? I'm not a political person, and I don't know how much you are. I'm not a political person, but would I want to live in a hardcore red state because of stuff like this? No. Now, Indiana, currently my current state, is a red state technically, but they ain't to the level of Texas. And I know you're gonna say I don't want to play the red state Olympics. Um,
I wasn't even going there.
well, I had to throw it out there because we hadn't said it in a while. Oh, and by the way, folks, willy nilly in the hopper. I haven't said those in a while. I had to get them in there for my uh, quota of Jasonism. So yeah. So I agree with you. Leaving Texas isn't going to be easy, but stuff like this, people aren't going to forget, and it might not be the reason they leave, but it could be like the straw that breaks the camel's back. Same reason why people would have left Illinois. I agree with you. It didn't cause you to leave, but the exodus numbers in Illinois for the last 5 years say that people were leaving the state for whatever reason. So, granted, that might not all been Chicago, but it wouldn't shock me if it was mostly. So,
Yeah, I I will say this. Funny thing about people that love to complain about Illinois, if you're gonna leave, just leave and stop complaining about the state after you left.
now, folks, to be clear, he ain't talking to me because well, I didn't leave Illinois specifically just because I didn't like Illinois. I left for different reasons. But I love Illinois. It's my home state, always will be. It has problems, has issues that might take a while to resolve, but it's still my home state. I love it. Illinois till I die, shot down for life. Every hashtag you want to think of. It's real talk. Um, but yeah, people were definitely up in a rage with this. So I think we kind of touched on it, is that a lot of people looked at this as an assault on women's rights, which I'm not a woman, but I have to understand that sentiment. But the interesting thing about that is there are other women who actually support this. So it's kind of that duality when it comes to, yeah, it's probably an assault on women's rights, but there are plenty of other women that are actually in favor of this. So uh, one interesting point that I want to bring up that I heard, I don't know her whole name, but it's a female politician who goes by the initials AOC.
Hey, Jason, quick question. You mentioned a lot of women, or some women were in favor of, like, was there like someone interviewed, or you mentioning like a politician that happened to be a woman in that was kind of positioning that law?
No. The whole politician thing, I was going on a different angle with that. But what I was referring to when it comes to women in favor of this, I'm speaking more on a personal standpoint to when there are people that I associate with, either personally, online, or otherwise, they are actually in support of women not getting abortions, and to the point of supporting laws like this that are put in place.
Okay.
I mean, it's kind of like the same thing that as all the stuff that seemingly Donald Trump would do that goes against women. There are still women who are supporting Donald Trump. It's that kind of same thing. Not saying those people are wrong or evil, but same mindset because of probably what are their religious beliefs potentially, which is up to that individual to make that decision. But that's what I mean when it comes to there are women who are in favor of abortion laws of some sort. But what I was going to mention with AOC is that I saw a good interview she did with somebody from, I think, CNN or NBC, but she was saying that 6 weeks is really more like 2 weeks, because after 4 weeks, that's really when you realize that you missed your period for a woman. So, so once you realize you had that missed period, that's when you realize that, okay, I might be pregnant, and then also you find out whatever method you do, whether it be a doctor, home pregnancy test, whatever, and that's when you realize, oh, I'm pregnant. So now you really only have 2 weeks to decide if you want to get that abortion in Texas. So, so I thought that was a good point by her, that 6 weeks you don't really, and some people don't know after 6 weeks. So, and one other interesting clause I wanted to mention is that there's no clause in this when it comes to cases of rape or incest. So essentially, if you get pregnant and it's 6 weeks after, you have no choice but to keep it. Which, again, I haven't necessarily given my stance on abortion per se, and I don't plan to. But what I am going to say is that I just find this law very interesting when it comes to kind of all, I don't know how to word it, but kind of all the side or ancillary perspectives on this. Some of which I just mentioned when it comes to women's rights, where women support it, um, and what you mentioned too, that the High Supreme Court didn't do anything to block this, even though it goes against Roe versus Wade.
Well, this
So
literally set up to effectively turn over Roe versus Wade.
right,
So,
so so it's a very interesting thing that they're doing there, and I totally understand anybody who's outraged by this. And again, countless women I've seen say their opinions on this. Um, yeah, it's interesting to see what happens if anything, if there is any legal battles fought from this, not necessarily from citizens, but more from federal government or anything, or you know whatever rather pro-abortion groups or anything, whatever. But yeah, I've always found this topic very interesting when it comes to who opposes it and who's in favor of it, and a lot of times it's the same classification of people when it comes to, in this case, gender or age sometimes, by who's for it and against it. But I will say that, and I can't point one out over the other, but I will say I've seen a lot of women comment on this, a lot of people, men too, about kind of the hypocrisy when it comes to Texas doing this, and it's definitely made me think. It's like, that's a very good point, a very good point, and I guess it always going to boil down to conception versus sentience when it comes to when does a life become a life, or is it more about potential of life? In this case, I've seen some people bring up, because there's a potential, you can't abort it or whatever. Then it goes down to also, well, My body, my choice. That's a valid opinion as well. So, but I guess I'll go ahead and end it on this. That it's very interesting that the government, whether it be state or otherwise, has to step in and decide to make a decision when it comes to something that's pretty close to a personal choice. Even though it's a mother's decision about her own kids, so some could say that's not really a personal choice because it affects more than just that one individual. But it's still that person's child. So it's kind of like, should it be their choice?
I mean, I even feel weird even calling it a child, because at that point it would not be able to sustain life on its own in 6 weeks. 6 weeks of conception, okay? So maybe I've shown my hand there, folks. But
That's a valid point too. That goes
yeah,
from what I was saying. It's a valid point. So
yeah. Well, that concludes our assessment of Texas as an entity. Love the barbecue, hate the politics. At least these two sets of politics. Coming up next, we're going to be talking about the start of the NFL season. Coming up next on Cal Park Bros.